Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! Setting aside their menus, Everett studied the wine list, debating whether to indulge in a more exquisite vintage. Amidst this deliberating dinner with his former college companion, Martin, the conversation wound its way to the upcoming nuptials. "It's a challenge," Martin bemoaned, his frustration tangible. "Having 7 brothers and ensuring symmetrical wedding party photos. Eleanor, my fiancée, only has 3 bridesmaids, and the disparity is causing her distress." Everett swallowed a mouthful of pasta, considering his retort. "Well," he began, a playful glint in his eye. "I could always don a dress and join the bridesmaids to restore harmony in the wedding portraits." The suggestion, though intended as a light-hearted jest, ignited an unexpected spark in Martin's gaze. He leaned forward, captivated.
"You know what? Eleanor might actually go for that."
"Wait, I was joking." Everett backpedaled, feeling a flush creep up his neck. But Martin was already pulling out his phone. "Eleanor loves unconventional wedding ideas, and she's always saying how weddings are too gendered anyway." "Martin, seriously? You've always had that thing about women's clothes anyway, right? That collection of fashion magazines you thought I didn't notice in college?" Everett froze, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. He'd thought those magazines, carefully hidden beneath his mattress like another young man might hide something entirely different, had been his secret alone. That was just...
"No judgment here, man. Eleanor's going to love this idea."
Before Everett could formulate a proper protest, Martin was already texting his fiancée, fingers flying across the screen with enthusiastic taps. Everett sat back in his chair, oddly breathless. He'd never admitted to anyone, barely even to himself, his fascination with women's fashion, the way fabrics and colors spoke to him in a language that men's clothing never had. He'd spent years tamping down those interests, channeling them into a successful career as a graphic designer, where his eye for aesthetics was an asset rather than something to hide. Martin's phone pinged with a response. His eyebrows shot up as he read the message. "She wants to video chat with you about it right now." The phone was suddenly thrust into Everett's hands, and Eleanor's beaming face filled the screen, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking exactly like the art history major she'd been when they'd all met in college. "Everett! Martin just told me your amazing idea!" Her voice bubbled with excitement. "I've been stressing about the wedding party balance for weeks!" "Eleanor, it was just a joke," he tried to explain, but something in her expression made him pause. "Was it, though?" she asked, her voice gentler now. "Because I remember that Halloween party junior year when you helped me put together my Audrey Hepburn costume. You knew more about the details of that black dress than I did." Everett swallowed hard. He remembered that night perfectly, how he'd gotten lost in the discussions of fabric drape and accessorizing, how natural it had felt. "I'm not asking you to do something that makes you uncomfortable," Eleanor continued. "But if this is something you've been curious about exploring, what better opportunity than with friends who support you?" The restaurant around him seemed to fade away as Everett considered her words. A year. The wedding was a year away. What might it be like to have permission, encouragement even, to explore this part of himself he'd kept locked away? "What exactly would this involve?" he heard himself asking. Eleanor's smile widened. "Let's start small. Maybe some weekend experiments? Women's jeans and t-shirts at first. Nothing dramatic. We can see how it feels and go from there." "And if I want to stop?" "Then you stop," she said simply. No questions asked. Martin, who had been watching this exchange with interest, added, "For what it's worth, I think you'd make a better-looking woman than half the guys in my family would." Everett laughed despite himself, feeling something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "I'd need a name, wouldn't I, for this experiment?" Eleanor looked thoughtful. "What about Milani? It's elegant but not too fussy." "Milani?" Everett repeated, surprised by how right it felt on his tongue. "I could try being Milani, just to see." And that was how, on a random Tuesday evening, Everett agreed to spend the year leading up to his best friend's wedding, exploring life as Milani. The first Milani weekend arrived 3 weeks later. Eleanor had shipped a discreet package to Everett's apartment with what she called starter pieces, women's straight-leg jeans, a few fitted t-shirts in soft fabrics, and a simple cardigan in a muted teal that Eleanor insisted would bring out his eyes. Everett sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the items laid out before him, his heart beating a rapid rhythm against his ribs. The apartment was silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street below. He was alone with these clothes and the possibility they represented. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the jeans. They didn't look dramatically different from men's jeans at first glance, but the cut was subtly altered, designed to hug curves he wasn't sure he had. He stepped out of his own jeans and pulled these new ones on, surprised by how they hugged his hips, how the fabric felt different against his skin. The t-shirt came next, a simple V-neck in a soft pink that he never would have chosen for himself. It draped differently than his boxy men's shirts, skimming his torso in a way that felt foreign but not unpleasant. Finally, the cardigan, slipping his arms into the sleeves, the teal fabric falling in a gentle line down his front. He avoided the mirror until everything was in place. Then, taking a deep breath, he turned to face his reflection. The person looking back wasn't dramatically transformed. He was still recognizably himself, but there was something different in the silhouette, something in the way the clothes suggested a different story about who he was. His phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. "How's it going? Pictures? Only if you're comfortable." Everett, no, Milani, she reminded herself, hesitated only briefly before snapping a tentative selfie and sending it. The response came almost immediately. "You look beautiful. How does it feel?" How did it feel? Milani looked back at the mirror, turning slightly to see herself from different angles. "Like I've been holding my breath for years and just now realized I could exhale," she typed back. 2 months into the experiment, Milani's weekend wardrobe had expanded considerably. Eleanor had introduced her to the concept of feminine business casual, and Milani had discovered a love for pencil skirts that hugged her hips and flared just slightly at the knee. She'd learned that coral brought warmth to her complexion, that silver jewelry complemented her blonde hair better than gold, and that the right belt could transform an outfit from bland to polished. Today, she was meeting Eleanor and 2 of the other bridesmaids, Carly and Denise, for lunch and wedding planning. She'd chosen a teal silk blouse, a color that had quickly become a favorite, tucked into a charcoal pencil skirt with subtle pinstripes. Low heels, still mastering the art of walking in anything higher, completed the outfit. As she approached the restaurant, she spotted Eleanor waving enthusiastically from an outdoor table. The familiar face calmed the butterflies that still fluttered in her stomach whenever she ventured out as Milani. "You look fantastic," Eleanor greeted her, standing to offer a hug. "Doesn't she look amazing?" she asked the other women at the table. Carly, whom Milani had met briefly at an engagement party, nodded appreciatively. "That blouse is gorgeous with your coloring." Denise, whom Milani was meeting for the first time, smiled warmly. "Eleanor's been telling us all about you. I'm so glad you're joining the bridesmaid crew. We needed someone with actual fashion sense." The easy acceptance in their voices made something warm bloom in Milani's chest. She slid into her seat, surprised by how natural it felt to be here, to be seen this way. "So," Eleanor said, sliding a wedding magazine across the table, "we're discussing bridesmaids' dresses today. I'm thinking raspberry for the color scheme." Milani found herself immersed in the conversation, offering opinions on necklines and fabric choices with a confidence that surprised her. When she suggested cap sleeves might be more flattering for various body types than strapless, the other women nodded in agreement. "See, this is exactly why we needed you," Denise said, pointing at Milani with her iced teaspoon. "You notice these things." "Speaking of noticing things," Carly interjected, her voice dropping conspiratorially, "have you started voice training yet? Eleanor mentioned you were thinking about it." Milani hesitated. Her voice was something she'd been self-conscious about. It wasn't deeply masculine, but it definitely wasn't feminine either. "I've been watching some YouTube tutorials," she admitted, "but it's harder than I expected." "My cousin is a speech therapist," Denise offered, pulling out her phone. "She works with trans clients all the time. I bet she'd be happy to give you some pointers." "Oh, I don't know if I'm—" Milani started, then stopped. Was she transgender? The question had hovered at the edges of her consciousness these past months, but she'd been careful not to examine it too closely, framing everything as preparation for the wedding. "You don't have to label anything," Eleanor said gently, seeming to read her thoughts. "But if voice training would make you more comfortable as Milani, it's worth exploring, right?" Milani nodded slowly. "Right. Yes, I'd love your cousin's contact info," she told Denise. "Thank you." The conversation shifted to wedding venues, but Milani's mind lingered on the question. Who was she becoming? Was this still an experiment, a role she was playing for a friend's wedding? Or was Milani emerging as someone more authentic than Everett had ever been? She didn't have answers yet, but sitting there among these women who accepted her without question, she realized she wasn't afraid to find out. 6 months into her journey, Milani stood in front of the full-length mirror in her apartment, practicing walking in the stiletto heels Eleanor had insisted she master before the wedding. Heel to toe, she murmured to herself, carefully crossing the room with measured steps. Her posture had improved dramatically over the months. Shoulders back, chin parallel to the floor, a straight line from head to heels. The buzzing of her phone interrupted her concentration. It was a FaceTime call from her mother. Milani's heart jumped into her throat. Her parents lived 2 states away and had no idea about Milani, about any of this. She'd maintained her life as Everett for work and family, carefully keeping the 2 worlds separate. She kicked off the heels and scrambled to answer the call, sitting at her desk where the camera would only show her from shoulders up. "Hi, Mom," she said, automatically dropping her voice back to Everett's register, a skill she'd maintained even as she'd developed Milani's higher, melodic way of speaking. "Everett, honey, how are you? You look different. Did you do something with your hair?" Milani reached up self-consciously. Her once short hair now brushed her shoulders in a blonde bob that framed her face softly. She'd told colleagues it was for a charity event, but she hadn't seen her parents in person since beginning this journey. "Just growing it out a bit," she replied casually. "What's up?" "Well, your father and I were thinking of visiting next weekend. It's been ages since we've seen your apartment, And we thought we could take you to dinner at that Italian place you mentioned. Next weekend, the weekend of Eleanor's bridal shower, which Milani was not only attending but helping to host. She'd been practicing a toast. She had a new dress hanging in her closet, a knee-length wrap style in a soft, floral print. "Next weekend isn't great, actually," she said, mind racing. "Work is crazy, and I've got plans with Martin and Eleanor. Wedding stuff, you know." Her mother's face fell slightly. "The weekend after, then? Your father has that conference in Phoenix the following week." Milani hesitated, feeling the walls of her carefully separated lives beginning to press in. How long could she maintain this division? Did she want to? "Mom," she began, her voice catching slightly. "There's something I need to tell you and Dad. About me. About some changes in my life." Her mother's expression shifted to concern. "Are you all right? Are you sick?" "No, nothing like that. I'm actually really good, better than I've been in a long time, but I've been exploring something about myself, and it's becoming more important to me than I expected." The words felt inadequate, clumsy in her mouth. How did she explain something she was still coming to understand herself? "Mom, She stopped, took a breath. "Can we do a proper call with you and Dad tonight? After dinner, your time?" Her mother agreed, worry still etched in the lines around her eyes, and they ended the call with Milani's promise to explain everything later. After hanging up, Milani sat motionless at her desk, heart pounding. She'd been living as Milani on weekends and, for social events, with increasing frequency, but she'd maintained the fiction that this was all temporary, all for the wedding. But as the months had passed, Everett had begun to feel like the costume, not Milani. Returning to male clothing for work felt increasingly like putting on a disguise, one that fit more poorly with each passing week. She picked up her phone again and sent a text to Eleanor. "Think I'm about to come out to my parents tonight. Terrified." Eleanor's response came quickly. "I'm here for you. Want me to come over? We can do it together if you want." Milani considered the offer, touched by her friend's support. "No, I think this is something I need to do myself. But thank you." She stood and walked to her closet, where Everett's clothes hung on one side, Milani's on the other. The division had seemed practical at first, but now it felt like a physical manifestation of the split in her life. Running her fingers along the fabrics, she stopped at a simple blue button-down shirt on Everett's side. She'd worn it countless times to family dinners, work meetings, casual gatherings. It was comfortable, familiar, safe. Then her hand moved to Milani's side, to a silk blouse in a similar shade of blue, but with subtle details that transformed it. A softly rounded collar, gently gathered cuffs, fabric that draped rather than hung. Tonight, when she spoke to her parents, which blue would she wear? The bridal shower was in full swing, the rooftop venue decorated with twinkling lights and vases of fresh flowers. Milani moved among the guests with newfound confidence. Her raspberry chiffon dress, a preview of the bridesmaid gowns to come, floating around her legs as she ensured everyone's champagne glasses stayed filled. 8 months had passed since that dinner with Martin, and Milani was no longer a weekend experiment, but an everyday reality. The conversation with her parents had been difficult, tearful at times, but ultimately healing. They were trying to understand, asking questions, making efforts with pronouns and her name. Her father had awkwardly complimented her hair during their most recent video call, a small gesture that had meant the world. At work, the transition had been more gradual, but similarly supported. Her design clients appreciated her eye for color and detail, regardless of how she presented, and her company's HR department had been surprisingly prepared to help with the practical aspects of her transition. "There you are!" Eleanor appeared at her elbow, flushed with excitement, and perhaps one glass of champagne too many. "Have you seen the cake? It's exactly what we discussed with the baker." Milani smiled, allowing herself to be pulled toward the dessert table where an elaborate 3-tiered creation waited to be cut. "It's perfect," she agreed, admiring the delicate sugar flowers that matched the real ones decorating the venue. "Just like your toast," Eleanor said, squeezing her arm. "I nearly cried." "Only nearly. I'll have to try harder at the wedding." Eleanor laughed, then her expression grew more serious. "Speaking of the wedding, I wanted to check in. Are you still comfortable with everything? Being in the wedding party, wearing the dress we chose, all of it?" The question caught Milani by surprise. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Well, when we started this, it was framed as this experiment, this temporary thing for my wedding. But it's clearly become much more than that for you. I just want to make sure you don't feel, I don't know, like I pushed you into a major life change under the guise of helping me with wedding photos." Milani took her friend's hands. "Eleanor, you didn't push me into anything. You just created a safe space for me to discover something I think I always knew about myself, but was too afraid to face." She glanced around at the gathering, women chatting, laughing, celebrating their friend. "Being Milani isn't something I'm doing for your wedding. It's who I am. Your wedding just gave me the courage to find that out." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. "Okay, now I'm actually crying." "Not until after the gift opening," Milani warned with a laugh. "Your mascara isn't waterproof." As if on cue, Denise clinked a spoon against her glass, announcing it was time for Eleanor to open her presents. The guests gathered around as Eleanor took her seat in a decorated chair at the front of the rooftop. Milani stood back, watching her friend exclaim over each gift, her heart full. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined standing here, in this dress, with her hair styled in soft waves around her face, feeling so completely at home in her skin. Carly sidled up beside her, offering a fresh glass of champagne. "You look happy," she observed. "I am," Milani confirmed, accepting the drink. "Happier than I knew was possible." "It shows." Carly clinked her glass against Milani's. "To finding yourself." "To finding myself," Milani echoed, taking a sip of the bubbly liquid. "And to good friends who help light the way." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp, with the promise of autumn fully taking hold. Milani had spent the night at Eleanor's parents' house, along with the other bridesmaids, part of the traditional pre-wedding gathering. She stood now in the guest bedroom she'd shared with Carly, applying her makeup with practiced strokes. Over the past year, she'd mastered the art of enhancing her features without overwhelming them. A touch of foundation to even her skin tone, a hint of blush to warm her cheeks, mascara to define her naturally long lashes, and a raspberry lipstick that perfectly matched the bridesmaid dresses. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, setting down her lipstick. Eleanor's mother, Patricia, entered with a garment bag draped over her arm. "I've brought your dress, dear," she said, hanging it on the closet door. "The alterations should be perfect now." Milani smiled gratefully. Unlike the other bridesmaids, her dress had needed special adjustments to accommodate her broader shoulders and narrower hips. Patricia, a skilled seamstress, had taken on the task herself, working closely with Milani through multiple fittings to ensure the dress would fit flawlessly. Thank you so much for all your work on this, Milani said, running her hand along the raspberry chiffon fabric. It means more than I can say. Patricia waved away the thanks. It was my pleasure. Besides, this wedding has brought us not just a new daughter-in-law, but a new friend in you as well. She adjusted the cap sleeve of the dress with a critical eye. Eleanor told me how much you've discovered about yourself this past year. I think that's just wonderful. The simple acceptance in the older woman's voice brought a lump to Milani's throat. It's been quite a journey, she managed. The best ones always are, dear. Patricia patted her shoulder. Now, finish getting ready. The photographer wants pre-ceremony pictures in 30 minutes. After Patricia left, Milani carefully stepped into the raspberry dress, feeling the soft chiffon settle around her. The cap sleeves she'd advocated for during the dress selection process framed her shoulders perfectly, and the A-line skirt floated gently to just below her knees. She secured the delicate belt at her waist, emphasizing the feminine silhouette she'd worked so hard to achieve. A year ago, standing in her apartment trying on women's jeans for the first time, she couldn't have imagined this moment, preparing to stand publicly as a bridesmaid in her best friend's wedding, fully embraced as Milani by everyone in her life. She slipped her feet into the silver heels they'd all chosen to complement the raspberry dresses, no longer needing to count steps or remind herself how to walk. The movement had become natural, her body finding its own rhythm and grace. A final glance in the mirror confirmed what she already knew in her heart. Milani wasn't a costume she put on or a role she played. Milani was who she had always been, finally free to exist in the light. The ceremony was everything a wedding should be. Moving, joyful, occasionally tearful in the best possible way. Milani stood proudly with the other bridesmaids, holding her bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, watching as Eleanor and Martin exchanged vows beneath an arch decorated with autumn flowers. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered friends and family erupted in applause. Milani caught sight of her parents in the fourth row, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her father smiling broadly. They'd traveled across 2 states to be here, not just for Martin and Eleanor, but for her, to see her standing confidently as Milani, to demonstrate their support in this public way. The reception was held in a converted barn, strung with more of the twinkling lights that had decorated the bridal shower. Dinner was served, toasts were given, and the dance floor opened to the upbeat music of the live band. Milani was sipping champagne and watching the dancing when Martin's youngest brother, Christopher, approached her table.
Would you like to dance?
He asked, offering his hand. Milani hesitated briefly. She'd met Christopher during the rehearsal dinner the night before, and he'd been polite but distant. Now he was looking at her with genuine interest. I'd love to, she decided, setting down her glass and taking his offered hand. On the dance floor, Christopher proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her through the upbeat song with confidence.
You know,
he said as they moved to the music.
Martin told me your story, how all this started as a way to balance the wedding party.
Milani tensed slightly.
Yes, that's true. I think it's amazing, he continued, surprising her. Not many people get the chance to discover who they really are, and even fewer have the courage to embrace it when they do. The tension in her shoulders eased. It wasn't always courage, she admitted. Sometimes it was just one small step after another, not realizing how far I'd come until I looked back. Isn't that how all important journeys go?
He spun her gently as the song shifted to something slower.
For what it's worth, I think you make a far better bridesmaid then you would have made a groomsman."
Milani laughed, the sound clear and musical.
"I think so too."
As they continued to dance, Milani caught sight of Eleanor and Martin swaying together nearby. Eleanor winked at her over her new husband's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes, acknowledgement of how far they'd come from that casual suggestion over pasta, pride in the journey they'd taken together. The evening wore on, filled with cake and laughter and more dancing. Milani kicked off her heels for the final hour, joining the other bridesmaids in a circle on the dance floor, their raspberry dresses swirling around them as they moved to the music. In the quiet moment between songs, Denise leaned in close to be heard over the chatter. "So, what happens now? After the wedding, I mean." Milani considered the question. For so long, the wedding had been the framework around which she'd built her transformation, the event on the horizon that gave structure to her journey. "Now," she said, looking around at the faces of friends who had supported her every step of the way. "Now I just keep living my life. As me." "I like the sound of that," Carly chimed in, throwing an arm around Milani's shoulders. The band struck up another song, and they were all moving again, caught up in the celebration of the moment. Milani closed her eyes briefly, feeling the music pulse through her, feeling the solid ground beneath her bare feet, feeling the rightness of her place in this circle of women. What had begun as a joke, a casual suggestion to solve a wedding party imbalance, had become the path to her authentic self. Standing there, in her raspberry chiffon dress with cap sleeves, her blonde hair catching the light of the overhead chandeliers, Milani realized that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the simplest steps, and as the night drew to a close, with fireflies blinking in the darkness outside the barn windows, and the last strains of music fading into the October air, Milani knew with absolute certainty that her journey was just beginning.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!